I've always been drawn to places where the lines between the past and present blur, where history isn't just something you read in books, but something you can almost touch. That's why, when I heard about the mysterious disappearance of a local fisherman on one of the small islands in the lagoon of Venice, I couldn't resist the pull. This wasn't just any island. It was one with a dark history, a place that had once been used as a quarantine station during the Black Plague. Abandoned for years, it was said to be cursed, haunted by the souls of those who never left. But as a journalist, I believed that every story had a truth waiting to be uncovered, no matter how chilling. My journey began early in the morning, when the fog still clung to the water like a shroud. Venice, usually bustling with tourists, was eerily quiet that day, almost as if the city itself knew where I was headed. I hired a small boat from an old fisherman who seemed reluctant to take me out to the island. He warned me with a look that said more than words ever could. But I brushed it off. Curiosity has always been my guiding light, and fear? Well, fear was something I thought I could handle. As the boat neared the island, the air grew colder, and an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. The island appeared through the mist like a ghostly apparition, its decaying buildings standing as silent sentinels of a bygone era. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I chalked it up to the atmosphere. After all, what was a haunted island without a bit of tension, right? I laughed to myself, trying to push away the creeping sense of dread that had started to take root. Stepping onto the island, the first thing that hit me was the smell, damp, musty, with a hint of something rotten. The buildings were in ruins, with walls covered in moss and ivy, and windows shattered as if something had tried to escape. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional caw of a crow. It was as if the island itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. I took out my camera, snapping photos, making mental notes of everything. But beneath my professional demeanor, a part of me was beginning to question my decision to come here alone. As I wandered through the crumbling structures, I couldn't help but think about the people who had been brought here, sick and scared, knowing they would never leave. Their fear seemed to hang in the air, and I could almost hear their whispers, carried on the wind. It was unsettling, to say the least. But it was also what I came for, the truth behind the stories, the reality that lay hidden beneath the surface. The deeper I ventured into the island, the stronger the feeling of being watched became, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. The day wore on, but time seemed to stretch and warp in the most unsettling ways. The sun, which had barely risen when I arrived, now hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that twisted and turned in the most peculiar ways. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my investigation, but the island had a way of getting under your skin, making you second-guess every step. The more I explored, the more I felt like I was walking into a trap, one that had been laid out long before I ever set foot here. And that's when I realized this island wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting. The deeper I ventured into the island, the more I felt the weight of its history pressing down on me. Every step I took echoed in the silence, as if the very ground beneath me was warning me to turn back. But I didn't come all this way to leave empty-handed. My curiosity was a double-edged sword, pushing me forward even as my instincts screamed at me to stop. The buildings, once grand and full of life, were now hollow shells, their walls crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. It was in one of these decaying structures that I had my first encounter with the island's dark past. I had just stepped into what must have once been a chapel, its once beautiful stained glass windows now shattered, the colored fragments scattered across the floor like a forgotten mosaic. The air inside was thick with a musty scent, a mixture of decay and something else, something colder. As I moved through the space, my footsteps echoed eerily, bouncing off the walls and returning to me in a distorted, almost mocking tone. And that's when I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned my head. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the broken windows. But then I saw it again, an unmistakable figure, gaunt and ghostly, standing just at the edge of my vision. It was there, and then it wasn't, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to rationalize what I had seen, but deep down, I knew. This was no figment of my imagination. This was something real, something that had once been human, but was now a tortured soul trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The temperature in the chapel dropped sharply, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The sense of dread I had felt earlier intensified, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. I wasn't alone in that chapel, and whatever was with me was not at peace. I could feel its presence, hovering just out of sight, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The air grew heavy, and I struggled to breathe, as if the very atmosphere had turned against me. I wanted to leave, to run back to the boat and never look back, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the island had rooted me to the spot, forcing me to confront the horrors it held. The shadows in the chapel seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing as if trying to take form. And then I heard it, a low, mournful moan that seemed to come from all around me. It was a sound of pure despair, the kind that chills you to the bone and makes you question your own sanity. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively reaching for the door. But as I turned to flee, something cold brushed against my arm, and I spun around to see nothing but empty air. The figure, the shadowy presence that had been watching me, was gone. But the fear it left behind was very real. My hands were trembling as I fumbled for the door, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the chapel. As I stepped outside, the air seemed to lighten, but the sense of being watched never left me. It was as if the island itself had marked me, and no matter where I went, its eyes would always be on me. Stepping out of the chapel, I expected to find some relief, maybe a return to the relative normalcy I'd experienced when I first set foot on the island. But something was off, very off. The sky, which had been overcast but clear, was now cloaked in a strange, perpetual twilight. It was neither day nor night, just a disorienting in-between that made everything feel unreal. My watch, usually reliable to the second, had stopped ticking, its hands frozen at some arbitrary moment. Time, it seemed, had no hold here, and that realization sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake off the unease and focus on the task at hand, but the world around me felt increasingly foreign, as if I had stepped into another realm altogether. The sounds of the island, which had been so eerily silent before, began to change. The whispering wind carried with it faint echoes, distant cries that seemed to come from all directions and none at all. I couldn't tell if they were real or just a figment of my imagination, but either way, they gnawed at the edges of my sanity, making it harder and harder to think straight. As I continued to explore, the landscape itself seemed to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. Paths that I was certain I had walked before now led me in circles, bringing me back to places I could have sworn I had left behind. Buildings that had been on one side of the island now appeared on the other, as if the island was playing tricks on me, warping reality to suit its own twisted design. It was like being trapped in a nightmare where nothing made sense, and every step I took only deepened my sense of dread. The air grew thick with tension, as if the island was closing in on me, tightening its grip with every passing moment. The distant cries I'd been hearing grew louder, more insistent, and I could no longer tell if they were human or something else entirely. They seemed to be calling out to me, pulling me deeper into the island's dark heart. My head ached with the effort of trying to make sense of it all, but there was no logic here, no reason. Just a creeping madness that threatened to consume me whole. I began to feel as though I was being watched, not just by unseen eyes, but by the island itself. It was alive, aware, and it knew I was here. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I could feel its presence in the very earth beneath my feet, in the trees that seemed to lean closer as I passed, in the shadows that flickered at the edge of my vision. It was as if the island was toying with me, pushing me to the brink, waiting to see how long I could hold out before I broke. My thoughts became increasingly fragmented, disjointed, as if the island was infecting my mind, eroding my sense of self. I could no longer trust my own perceptions what was real, and what was just another trick of this cursed place. I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was that I was trapped in a place where time had no meaning, where the past and present collided in ways that defied explanation. The more I tried to fight it, the deeper I sank into the island's twisted reality. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, that I would lose myself entirely to the madness, the cries suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. The world around me seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew, without a doubt, that the worst was yet to come. The island had more in store for me, and whatever it wasn't going to let me go easily. I wandered through the island in a daze, my mind reeling from the bizarre distortions of time and space. It felt as though I was descending deeper into a labyrinth with no exit, each step dragging me closer to the heart of the island's dark secrets. The buildings grew more decrepit as I ventured further, their skeletal remains jutting out from the overgrown foliage like the bones of some long-dead beast. My instincts told me to turn back, to escape while I still could, but my curiosity, that unyielding force, drove me forward. That's when I stumbled upon it, a hidden entrance beneath what appeared to be the main building. The doorway was obscured by thick vines and rubble, as if the island itself was trying to keep it hidden. But I was determined, and with some effort, I cleared the way and descended into the darkness below. The air was damp and stale, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. As I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cut through the blackness, revealing a narrow passageway that led to a chamber deep within the earth. The walls were lined with ancient, rusted torture devices, relics of a time when cruelty was a means to an end. As I stepped into the chamber, a wave of nausea hit me, and I was overwhelmed by a series of visions, flashes of pain, suffering, and unimaginable torment. I saw them, the prisoners, their gaunt faces twisted in agony, their bodies broken and bloodied by the implements of torture that surrounded me. Their screams echoed in my ears, a cacophony of despair that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I could feel their pain, their fear, as if it was seeping into my own soul. These were not just memories of the past. They were living, breathing manifestations of the island's horror. The room itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the walls closing in on me as the visions grew more intense. I tried to ground myself in reality, to remind myself that these were just echoes of a bygone era, but it was no use. The island was alive with the suffering of the damned, and it was determined to make me a part of it. I could feel the weight of their souls pressing down on me, dragging me deeper into the nightmare that was their eternal torment. I moved through the chamber, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The torture devices, covered in rust and dried blood, were more than just instruments of pain. They were conduits for the island's dark power. Each one seemed to hum with the energy of the souls it had claimed, and as I touched them, I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body. It was as if the island was trying to communicate with me, to show me the depths of its cruelty. My hands trembled as I continued my exploration, but I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth, no matter how horrific it was. The visions continued to assault me, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. I saw prisoners writhing in agony, their eyes pleading for mercy that would never come. I heard the laughter of their tormentors, cold and cruel, echoing through the chamber. It was a symphony of suffering, and I was trapped in the middle of it. The more I saw, the more I realized that this place was not just a quarantine station. It was a chamber of horrors, a place where the infected were brought not to heal, but to suffer. The island had been a prison, a place of unspeakable cruelty where the worst of humanity was laid bare. And now those souls were reaching out, desperate to be heard, desperate to find release. But the island held them fast, and their torment was far from over. It was as if the island itself was feeding on their pain, growing stronger with each passing moment. By the time I finally forced myself to leave the chamber, I was shaken to my core. The island had shown me its true face, and it was more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. But even as I fled the darkness, I knew that the worst was still to come. The island wasn't done with me yet, and its tortured souls were far from finished with their story. Emerging from that nightmarish chamber, I felt as though I had left a part of myself behind. My mind was clouded, heavy with the horrors I had witnessed, yet I knew I couldn't stop now. There was something more, something deeper that I had to uncover. The island had drawn me in with its dark allure, and now it was holding me captive with the weight of its secrets. I wandered through the crumbling ruins, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me like a vice. And then, amidst the decaying remnants of the past, I found what I had been searching for: a room filled with old, dust-covered records. The papers were yellowed with age, their edges brittle and crumbling, but the words they contained were still legible. As I carefully sifted through them, a chilling narrative began to unfold. The island, once a place of quarantine, had become a twisted laboratory under the control of a deranged doctor. His name appeared repeatedly in the documents, his signature scrawled at the bottom of reports detailing gruesome experiments. He had believed that suffering could purify the soul, that through pain and agony, one could achieve a twisted form of redemption. And so, he had subjected countless victims to unimaginable torment, all in the name of his perverse ideology. As I read, a sense of dread settled over me, like a cold hand gripping my heart. The doctor's methods were horrific torture, disguised as treatment, pain masquerading as healing. His patients were not just sick. They were prisoners, condemned to a fate worse than death. The island had become a place of endless suffering, a purgatory where the souls of the damned were trapped in a never-ending cycle of torment. And the doctor? He had been the architect of it all, a madman driven by a twisted vision of salvation through suffering. The deeper I delved into the records, the more I felt his presence. It was as if the very walls of the room were infused with his malevolence, his madness seeping into the air around me. I could almost hear his voice, cold and detached, as he described the treatments he administered. There was no remorse in his words, no hint of humanity, only a clinical detachment that made my blood run cold. This man had been a monster, and his legacy was written in the suffering of the souls he had condemned. My hands shook as I continued to read, each page revealing a new horror, a new atrocity committed in the name of his twisted beliefs. The island, once a place of quarantine, had become hell on earth, and the doctor had reveled in the power it gave him. He had seen himself as a savior, a bringer of redemption through pain. But the truth was far darker. He was a torturer, a man who took pleasure in the suffering of others, and his actions had damned the island forever. It was then that I felt a presence behind me, cold and malevolent. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. And there he was, the doctor, or what was left of him. His ghostly form was twisted and grotesque, his face a mask of malevolent glee. His eyes, hollow and dark, bored into mine, and I could feel his hatred, his madness radiating from him like a physical force. I was paralyzed, trapped in his gaze, unable to move, unable to breathe. For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, locked in a silent confrontation. His smile was twisted, a grotesque parody of humanity, and I knew in that moment that I was staring into the face of true evil. The doctor was not just a ghost, he was a part of the island, a manifestation of its darkest secrets. And he wasn't done with me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was now part of his twisted game, another soul trapped in the web of his madness. Finally, with a force of will I didn't know I possessed, I broke free of his gaze and stumbled backward, gasping for air. The doctor's image flickered and faded, but I knew he wasn't gone. He was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. The island had shown me the truth, and it was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. The doctor's story wasn't finished, and neither was mine. With the doctor's twisted grin still haunting my thoughts, I knew I had to get off the island. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to leave, to run as fast as I could, but the island seemed to have other plans. The paths I had taken earlier now led me in circles. The landmarks I had carefully noted were nowhere to be found. It was as if the island itself was conspiring against me, twisting its geography to keep me trapped. My heart raced as I realized that I wasn't just lost, I was being hunted. I retraced my steps, trying to find the boat that had brought me here, but the more I searched, the more the island seemed to close in around me. The trees, gnarled and twisted, seemed to move on their own, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, ready to snatch me away. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, the silence broken only by the distant wails of the tortured souls I had encountered before. Their cries were louder now, more desperate, as if they were urging me to join them in their eternal torment. Panic began to set in, and I found myself running, blindly tearing through the underbrush, desperate to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was right behind me, just out of sight. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with the effort, but still I couldn't find my way out. The island had become a maze, a prison, and I was its latest victim. Every path I took seemed to lead me deeper into its clutches, closer to the dark heart of its power. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them figures moving in the shadows, their forms barely visible in the dim light. At first, I thought they were more of the island's tortured souls, but as they came closer, I realized they were different. These were not ghosts. They were something else entirely, something darker, more malevolent. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their mouths twisted into cruel smiles as they advanced on me. I knew then that the island had unleashed its full fury, and it wasn't going to let me go. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but the island's grip on me tightened with every passing second. The figures closed in, their laughter cold and mocking, and I could feel their icy breath on my skin. I stumbled backward, tripping over the roots that seemed to spring up out of nowhere, and fell to the ground. The figures loomed over me, their faces twisted in glee, and I knew that I was trapped. There was no escape, no way out. The island had claimed me, and there was nothing I could do. But then, in the midst of my despair, I felt a surge of defiance. I wasn't going to go down without a fight. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring where I was going, just desperate to put as much distance between myself and those figures as possible. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps echoing in the darkness, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My only hope was to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of the island's twisted inhabitants. I don't know how long I ran, But eventually, I stumbled upon a clearing, the air suddenly still and quiet. The figures had disappeared, their laughter fading into the distance, but I knew they were still out there, waiting. The island was toying with me, letting me think I had a chance, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was no escaping this place. The island had its claws in me, and it wasn't going to let go. My fate was sealed, and the only question that remained was how long I could hold out before the island finally claimed me as its own. I stood in the clearing, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. The island seemed to hold its breath with me, the air thick with anticipation. I knew there was nowhere left to run, no more tricks up my sleeve. The island had been playing with me all along, leading me through a nightmare of its own design, and now it was time for the final act. I could feel it in the stillness, in the way the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, as if eager to claim me. But there was something I still needed to understand, something that had been eluding me this entire time. Driven by a mixture of fear and a desperate need for answers, I found myself retracing my steps, heading back to where it had all begun, the chamber beneath the main building. The journey back was surreal, the island's geography shifting around me, as though it was guiding me to my final destination. The path that had taken hours to navigate now seemed to unfold in mere minutes, leading me straight to the hidden doorway I had discovered earlier. It was as if the island wanted me to return, to see the truth with my own eyes. As I descended into the darkness, the temperature dropped, the air growing colder with each step. The chamber awaited me, the rusted torture devices standing as silent witnesses to the horrors that had unfolded there. But this time, the room felt different. There was a presence here, something far more powerful than the tortured souls I had encountered before. It was as if the island itself had come alive, its dark energy concentrated in this one spot, ready to reveal its ultimate secret. I stepped into the center of the room, the weight of the island's history pressing down on me like a physical force. And then, as if summoned by my very presence, the shadows began to move. They coalesced in the middle of the chamber, forming a figure I had come to dread, the doctor, his ghostly form twisted and malevolent. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, the tortured souls appeared, their faces etched with pain and despair, their eyes locked on me. They were waiting for something, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. It was then that the truth hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. This island wasn't just haunted, it was a purgatory, a place where the souls of the damned were trapped, unable to move on. And I was now part of it. The doctor, the twisted architect of this nightmare, had left a legacy of suffering that had permeated the very fabric of the island. Every soul that had perished here was now bound to the island, their torment never ending, their pain feeding the island's dark power. And by setting foot on this cursed ground, I had sealed my own fate. The realization was like a cold blade slicing through my heart. There was no escape, no way out. The island had claimed me, just as it had claimed all those before me. The doctor's twisted smile grew wider, as if he could read my thoughts, as if he knew that I finally understood the full horror of my situation. The souls around him began to close in, their hands reaching out, their faces twisted in agony. I could feel their pain, their desperation, and I knew that they were pulling me into their world, into the endless cycle of torment that awaited me. But even as the shadows closed in, a small, defiant part of me refused to give in. I had one last chance, one final act of defiance. With every ounce of strength I had left, I let out a cry, a desperate, anguished cry that echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls. It was a cry of defiance, of refusal to accept the fate the island had laid out for me. And as the mist began to rise from the floor, enveloping me in its cold embrace, I made a choice. I took a step forward, into the unknown, into whatever lay beyond the island's grasp. The mist swallowed me whole, and in that moment, everything went silent. The island, the doctor, the tortured souls all faded into nothingness. I don't know what happened after that, whether I was freed or condemned to an even darker fate. All I know is that the island's grip on me was broken, at least for now. But its presence still lingers, a shadow on the edge of my consciousness, a reminder that some places, some stories, are better left untold.